Hi, everybody. Jeff in the parked car. Yes, I'm parked. I'm not driving. No hands. So, got one hand holding the phone, but I'm in place. But one thing I want to talk about in this, working with the French is about. I had this idea and I needed to do it. I'm actually doing the same idea when working with the French, working with the Americans, and working with the Germans because I'm doing all three videos right now because this idea came up yesterday and I really need to get it out before I forget it. So the one I want to talk about here is how the French see money, and how that is this whole perspective of the indulgence versus constraint, a restraint concept with Hofstede, and then also the future and short term, kind of long term and short term visions of also Hofstede's brought up, and how that fits into money and investments. So the thing came up yesterday was the French actually see money as a taboo. This is something you should not talk about. You don't talk about pay raises. You don't take. I mean, this is something that's really you don't bring out and mention in public. Whereas some other cultures we just had no problem saying it. Right? Make this much, right? Or this range. But it's like and I've been actually told in some, like when I had to talk about give some talks, to not, in the French environment, to not bring up social status inequality. Okay. Inequality, that's showing that there are different levels and that people, by their different cars they have, shows their social status. I was told not to talk about this, okay? And I brought it up, and people critiqued me afterwards, like, see, so this is no big deal for an American, right? But in France, no. So I learned to just not say that anymore. But now I'm just realizing, that this is just one point of view. And it's a point of view that when you're going to be working with French, you need to understand this. Because some people from other cultures don't have this understanding at all, right? I made that mistake, right? Well, it's not a mistake anymore because I still have no problem still talking about it, right? But I'll adjust it and adapt it based on who I'm talking to, right? But the French see, money. It's not so much investment; it's more about indulgence. We already talked about that. So spending is more about on the indulgence side, right? But it's not so much in the assets side, okay? So the French have no problem like renting apartments, right? And renting long term, because they don't have to worry about buying it, and then you have to keep it up, right? If the owner has to keep it up, but you don't have to bother with it, right? So sometimes it's not, the investment is seen as, the assets are seen as things that you don't want to have to bother with, right? To maintain. You let the owner have to deal with it. In some ways, I mean, these things can apply in different ways. So the French have no problem. They do vacationing all the time, right? The whole culture is built on vacationing. The entire culture is everything's built on the education system, the vacation system. And so it's constantly that. And I already mentioned this, right? But see, so you have to understand that when you're doing deals and doing business with French people, they are in this indulgence thinking thing. And that how they make decisions based on money-based decisions can sometimes be very influenced about what it is and how they perceive an investment, or what is an investment. Sometimes it's like, if you really want to be really good, that the problem is for, I'll say, a culture that comes from a investment culture. And I don't want to say investments in money, investments in assets, okay? Assets, long-term assets, cars, houses, bicycles, phones, cameras, and buying higher quality stuff and those assets. People that come from those cultures, say the Germans and the Americans, right, will have a hard time adjusting to a culture that focuses on indulgence of short-term services that are only going to be good for like a day to a week, right? The value of that thing will only, the life, the shelf life of that thing, okay, it's only going to be for a week. It's not going to be for a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or 50 years or 40 years or whatever. Whereas the Germans and the Americans will tend to go to those things that have a longer shelf life. And this can be really difficult for people that are coming from these long shelf life. This is hard to say. Keep this in mind. Long shelf life or long-term shelf life perspectives to something that is short-term shelf life value. This is something that's it's tough for people to adjust to. And I think it's a lot easier for a French person who comes from the short-term shelf life thing to adjust going to the other direction, because you're just deciding how do you invest or where you put your money in your assets, right? You just have to learn how to do vacationing less, right? And if you're forced to have to do that, then you can do that. But it's harder to come to understand the other perspective. It really is. I think it really is, and I've seen a lot of people struggle with this. Now I've struggled with it enough, and the work ethic stuff and the whole thing of, just the whole thing of time and the whole thing of the short-term value of the shelf life of vacation time is so sacred in France. It's really hard to, and everything turns around this. Everything is about talking about vacation. Everything, I'm serious. It's all talking about that. Whereas it's like every time you have to talk about this when you come back from vacation. In fact, you're expected to. And sometimes I just have a different perspective. I say, well, yeah, it worked or something. And there's an expectation. I have to tell about how my whole family is doing in France. It's like you're supposed to continue on saying how, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's a really different perspective. Whereas, I think that people come from, other countries and can say, yeah, we did it, done. I mean, it's just done. It's like, well, we had a week of thing and we're done. Whereas the French want to relive this thing. They have to talk about it. They have to do it. And they have to talk about the next one. So it's a lot of these cyclical short-term services that is focused on short-term services rather than long-term investment, where, if you got a car, you're not going to sit there and talk about your car all the time, right? So long-term investment, you bought it, and now you're going to be satisfied with it for long-term, and you're just going to have it. And so there's no need to, you might mention something about something here, but it's just like, yeah, it's a long-term, a long-term value. So it's no big deal to mention it. So I think this is something, again, this is just a thought. I might have some other ideas. I have to make maybe another subsection of this chapter about, but this might help to get some, clarification on how to deal with other cultures and how they perceive the money topic, or where you spend your money on assets, okay, or services, and the shelf life of those with respect to the indulgence versus restraint, dimension, and also in the short-term versus long-term dimension by Hofstadter. And I think that's something really worth, considering when you look at how different cultures interpret that and how they will implement and actually apply that in their daily lives in doing business and other things. Right? Thanks.